Hello, everyone. Welcome into Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. Here with Stay Hot and Blue Wire's Theo Ash. Here to talk about all things Chargers off season, Chargers 2023 season, if we want to willingly talk about that. But Theo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's about to be ruined, though, talking about the Chargers season. It was a good day.
Yeah. I want to start because the first TikTok I saw from you this season was the Justin Herbert Green Bay TikTok. So if you want to break down some of the things you saw in that game and maybe how they were just kind of encapsulative of the 2023 season.
Yeah, I saw a lot of failings from Justin Herbert, a failure to motivate the defense, to get the correct calls in, a failure to get guys set on that side of the ball. And then on offense, just not getting the guys the right equipment, like gloves that maybe weren't fit for the weather. Like I saw some guys dropping passes, and it's like, man, as the quarterback, I feel like you gotta you have some responsibility to like make sure the wide receivers catch the football, right?
Yeah, and make
So
sure Austin Eckler's wearing the right cleats.
and make sure his ankle isn't taped too heavily or whatever it is. Like, man, just a complete lack of oversight from Justin Herbert. In that
What
game.
were some of your thoughts, I guess, on how, the whole Staley tenure, ended and, what you saw, I guess, from the Chargers on that side of the ball this season and just how they were managed, this year?
Yeah, I think that what it came down to was seemingly a lack of communication or a lack of knowledge from the front office or communication between the coaching staff and front office about what Staley needed to succeed. It just felt like everybody they brought in wasn't the right guy, wasn't the solution to the problem. J.C. Jackson, obviously being the biggest example, but Kendricks and Sebastian Joseph Day. I know Khalil Mack had a bunch of sacks this year, but it was 6 of them came in one game against a statue in the pocket. Like he was by far the least egregious of the moves, but I think that's the main thing that sunk the Chargers season. I thought even like as recently as the Baltimore game, which happened in the second half of the season, I saw some of the stuff, some of the coverage mechanics, and was like, yeah, these are pretty interesting things, like what they're doing to shut guys down, like locking something up, special coverage on the number 2, or things like that they can tweak to take away certain matchups or cause confusion on the back end. But the run is always what killed them, and their actual personnel on the back end could be picked on the whole year. So I thought Staley, from a game plan perspective, like it wasn't always the most egregious stuff that I'd ever seen. But when you watch the defense, it's like there's just no good players here. And I don't know what the deal was this offseason, like what went wrong on almost every single one of their draft picks and signings. Yeah. But just a strange year. Like Quentin Johnston as well on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, I watched him and really didn't think he was worthy of a first round pick. Like the drop issues were pretty predictable. The lack of separation was pretty predictable. If you watched his tape at TCU, I thought, and they took him round 1 over some guys I had a higher grade on. And it's like, what's with that? You could have built a much better team with the resources that you had. And instead they kind of wasted them all. And I think that's the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about J.C. Jackson, right, I really think Staley hinged a lot of this defense on him being the guy, right? I mean, even we're seeing in Miami right now in a similar Fangio scheme where the on-off numbers when Jalen Ramsey plays and when he doesn't play, what that defense is capable of looking like. So I wasn't too surprised. Obviously the lack of talent, injuries kind of just compounded itself during the season, but it really does feel like when that defense doesn't have that lockdown corner, and now you were relying on Michael Davis and Asante Samuel Jr., who also weren't necessarily the most surefire tacklers this year. It really makes the back end of the defense look quite a bit worse. So yeah, definitely from an investment standpoint, I don't know what they kind of were thinking going into this year. I did think that they could run the 2022 team back, but I just think after Jacksonville, there's a mental toll of some of the Staley stuff too, for sure. But yeah, going forward now that the Chargers have an open coaching spot, tell me who you think. I mean, I guess as of now, Jim Harbaugh is the betting favorite on most of these sites to be the coach. But who do you think actually would be the best head coach, for the Chargers if you were to make the call?
If I could make the call, I'd probably go with man, I don't know. Harbaugh's an intriguing option. I think that he was in my S tier of coaching candidates along
Hmm.
with like Vrabel. I think that his fit in LA could be nice because they have no GM opening. So
Right.
Harbaugh will probably want the keys to like the entire operation, and the Chargers look like a team that could be in position to give him that. And then you don't really have to worry about the communication between coach and GM because one guy could be everything for that team, and that's Jim Harbaugh. He's had
Hmm.
success absolutely everywhere that he has been. Um, but my thing with Harbaugh, and I really just wonder what it would look like with Justin Herbert. I have no idea. When I think about Harbaugh teams, I think of Michigan and the 49ers, and I'm not really old enough to remember too far past that. But it was never really a diverse drop back passing game, and they've never really had a quarterback like Justin Herbert on a Harbaugh staff that I've seen. JJ McCarthy was a bit limited in terms of what he was allowed to do in longer dropbacks, and so was Colin Kaepernick. I mean, that was Greg Roman was his offensive coordinator during those days, and they revolutionized everything with the read option stuff. So I would be very interested to see the direction that they would go in because I have no idea what it would look like. So he's probably my best coach, but I also from a scheming standpoint, like I don't know what he would do with Justin Herbert. I don't think that he would design something bad. I just
Hmm.
don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it feels weird because I mean, Pete Carroll was really the last head coach who's like, all right, well, it's been like a decade since I've been an NFL head coach, and then like I came back, right?
Right.
When he went from New England to USC and then to Seattle. But Harbaugh is kind of unprecedented, right? Like in the modern
Hmm.
era of coaches. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see what that looks like if it happens. Certainly, the most intriguing coach, and then you kind of have like your Ben Johnson, who is out there interviews with the Chargers tomorrow. But yeah, I do think the GM component of this is interesting because they, have interviewed people who either have Jim Harbaugh connections or were in Baltimore with his brother.
Yep.
And that's like four of the candidates for GM right now. So it's like they're, tipping their hand, pretty clearly to what they're going to do. And then you have David Shaw interviewing for head coach, former Stanford offensive coordinator, and it's like I do kind of think that maybe there's a position for him to be Jim Harbaugh's OC on his Chargers football
Mhm.
team. I wouldn't be stunned by that. I guess going out to the other candidates, if you have Harbaugh and S tier, who are some sneaky like dark horse choices for this job?
I think what's the name? Is it I think it's a basic name that can always confuses me. But Frank Smith, the
Yeah, yeah,
Dolphins
yeah.
offensive coordinator, he's
Mhm.
someone that's a bit of a mysterious guy in this process. I don't think that many know much about him. He doesn't get too much buzz. But if you want an offensive guy, he might be a good fit. The Shanahan tree is looking a bit picked over right now. Uh, but that's a dude who has worked with Mike McDaniel for a while now, who has been a huge part in building a super efficient offense. The Tua versus Herbert debates have always been there, and like, what would Herbert do in this offense? Like, how easy would it be for him? And it's like you kind of have an opportunity to maybe find out. But I don't know that much about him. But Slowick is from that tree. He gets a ton of hype. Ben Johnson is trying to like replicate kind of that tree. But there's also Frank Smith, who is actually, been around it for many years now, and he doesn't get too much, buzz. So he's someone that I would keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, he's also the former Chargers offensive line coach who, before he took that Miami OC job. So
Hmm.
I'd be curious to see him. I mean, when they had him back then, it was one of the better seasons of the Chargers offensive lines, that's talking about like rookie year of Slater, when they kind of were solid in that area before kind of the downfall and, Corey Linsley and that situation and sort of the downfall of the offensive line this year. But if you could get a guy in there who can integrate those Shanahan concepts while also, hopefully fixing that offensive line, which, he has experience with, and that's like, the perfect almost ammunition to let Justin Herbert cook and do all those things with that offense and put him in that, Miami scheme, if you will. So I definitely think that's a dark horse candidate. Maybe if like Harbaugh backs out of this job.
Yeah, something major would have to fall through. It's tough to get the fan base like Harbaugh is coming,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's Frank
Dan
Smith, who no
Quinn.
one's ever heard of. Like
Like,
people would be
yeah.
like, Who is this? I thought we were getting John Harbaugh. I thought we were winning Super Bowls and going to the NFC Championship every year. I thought we were getting that coach who's done that,
Right.
not someone I've never heard of. So it would definitely be a absolute plot twist if they were to go his direction, or really anyone's direction, but Harbaugh
Yeah.
at this point.
I,
But
I
yeah,
think the
this
I think the way you could make the Chargers fan base the angriest would be to promise them Jim Harbaugh and then give them Dan Quinn, who just got 48 points put on his head by Jordan Love. That's
or
probably the one.
or Raheem Morris, who just another Rams defensive coordinator who just let Michael Hoyt get picked on in the playoffs that everybody watched. That would also be a good little plot twist. Although I do like Raheem Morris as a candidate.
Yeah, no, I mean he definitely deserves his respect. Just not when the whole fan base wants to hire Jim
Not
Harbaugh. Not
not the
not not the
Chargers.
current juncture. Yeah.
Yeah, that would not be
um,
a good fit.
uh, Pivoting to the draft a little bit, they do have the number 5 pick. This is a pick where you can go Malik Neighbors. A lot of Chargers fans happen to love Brock Bowers. With that pick potentially too. Offensive line, to eat your vegetables with that pick as well, with Fashanu or Alt in that spot. Where do you kind of see the Chargers going there? If you were to say.
Bowers is an interesting one. I don't know if you could take him over a guy like a Dunze or Neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
though. I think that Bowers is a really good tight end, but he is kind of in that he's a vertical threat tight end. He's not to
Right.
me an amazing inline blocker. He is a bit small. He's a really willing blocker, and I think like when he gets to the second level, he can really start to punish dudes. But I think just his overall, build and weight prevents him from being that elite blocking type in line, which I think a lot of people don't quite realize about him. He's someone that I would want in the slot catching as many passes as possible. And if the choice is a tight end doing that or Malik Neighbors doing that, like I think I
Right.
know who is probably going to add more explosiveness over the course of a season, and it's the wide receiver more than the slot type tight end, like kind of in the Dalton Kincaid role. And Dalton Kincaid's been very good for the Bills, so that wouldn't be a disaster pick or anything. But yeah, I think I would go with one of the wide receivers. I know that they just took Johnston, but again, I didn't love his tape coming out of TCU. The rookie year was such a disaster. You're staring an actual blue chip prospect that is like screaming superstar at you. It was still a good idea to pair Justin Herbert with a guy like that. They just had the wrong guy. I think that it's still a worthy pursuit. I think it's fine if you take one right after taking Johnston the previous year. That's the direction that I would go in the Daniel Jeremiah mock this morning. I saw that he went wide receiver for the Chargers, and I don't think I could agree more. That's where I would go.
Yeah. I also wouldn't mind. I mean, given their situation, like with their cap and obviously a lot of aging veterans on the team, who knows what they're going to do with Keenan Allen, with Joey Bosa, with Khalil Mack, Mike Williams, who they all restructured last year. If you want to trade back and get an extra pick next year or something, right? Like, I think that's something I wouldn't mind doing for this team, simply, to get their lack of resources. And it's like right now, you're obviously not taking someone like a Jerjon Newton or like a Kool-Aid at 5. But if you were to go
Yeah,
back to like 11 or 12, right, like maybe that would be the point where you could, sort of invest in the defense in that area, stack up on a pick next year, almost kind of Howie Roseman, Philadelphia style, like he's done in some of these last couple drafts. So that's also a direction that if they don't go with, the obvious wide receiver, tight end, offensive line pick, like I kind of wouldn't mind that for them as well.
especially if you could get an established defensive player. Like that's definitely a side of the ball that absolutely must be addressed
Yeah.
even more than the offense. The only reason I say the wide receiver right now is just because those three are in a different tier of prospects than I think
Right.
the defensive prospects in this draft. So if it was a defensive prospect who was that good, I would say for the Chargers, look, let the wide receiver position ride. You need all the help you can get on defense, but because that's not available, I think they should go with wide receiver. But in a trade back, if you could do something like what the Bears did last year and get like a DJ Moore level cornerback, I don't know, then yeah, go for it.
I think you got a lot of crap from Chargers fans for calling Keenan Allen washed and saying he took a step down last year. So I am entitled to ask by the audience, did he beat the washed allegations this year?
Yeah, he did beat the washed allegations in a big way. I should have said like not as good of an athlete as he used to be and turn that take down about like 30% because I do believe that he, there were some yak plays, especially 2 years ago, where I was like, dude, they gotta take him behind the shed. Like there was one against the Colts. There was one against the Colts. He caught it and like turned up field and like he couldn't corner fast enough and he ran out of bounds. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. And this year they still gave him a bunch of screens, which I was like, I don't know about
Yeah.
that. But the flexibility was there, like his ability to kind of contort at the catch point and snag things. Like the catch radius was still absolutely big time. He still knows how to exploit zone coverage. He still has the footwork. And to be washed, you can't be a productive player on a team anymore. And he was definitely that. So yeah, I was wrong to call him washed. He did. I mean, as you'd expect, as from someone in his 30s, he probably did take a step back athletically from where he was maybe in his prime, but it also just may have been injury bothering him last year because this year I didn't really detect much wrong with him. He was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see because he ended up putting like 1,200 yards up, and he didn't even play the last like 4 games. So I'm curious
I
to see,
know he would have like led the league in receiving yards.
Yeah, no, I mean, if he had another 4 or 5 games with Justin Herbert, he would have easily been in that top 3 conversation for yards this year. But yeah, just I hope that's the case next year where they don't like kind of quiet sit him at the end with, oh, he has a heel injury and he's not coming back because Easton Stick is playing. But that, was sort of the situation they were in towards the end of the season. But yeah, I guess, what do you think is the thing that needs to change outside of head coaching, outside of GM? What needs to change, I guess, the most about the Chargers, from last year to the point where they can be, a playoff threat, or even, don't want to jinx it on this podcast, but a Chiefs level threat next year?
I would start with they need to be able to tackle.
It's a basic thing in football, but they do need to be able to do that.
If they could tackle, I think it would be a whole different conversation. I think Herbert by himself gives you a pretty good offense, even if things around him are going wrong, even if Mike Williams is always hurt, even if Keenan Allen isn't, the fastest, deep threat in the world, even if Quentin Johnston is a bust, you can still put points on the board with Justin Herbert and at least make it a close game. You may fall short, but at least you're going to be in it. If you combine that with a defense that can stop the run, with a defense that can limit the big plays, 10-yard plays don't turn into 50, which has always been the case as long as he's been on the team, then I think you're like kind of fine, right? Like it doesn't take much to be a contender when you have a quarterback of that level. And I think the number one thing that has killed the Chargers, the number one thing you can point to, is Staley didn't develop anybody and no one on the team could tackle. So I think that's the main thing, like an element of physicality, the ability to stop the run. Those have been the number one worst unit that the Chargers have had, or the worst aspect of playing football that the Chargers have been over the Justin Herbert era. I think that's the thing that has to change the most.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely has to change. Like just watching the games every week, watching the tape every week, like it's not pretty to see that out there. And unfortunately, it's tough to also just see. I was talking about this with Daniel Popper. Players also not being put in the right positions too, right? Where you have Staley's vision for somebody like Derwin James, which was to play 5 positions, kind of at the same time and do all of this, Swiss Army knife stuff. But then like that didn't really end up working, in the defense this year. Right. And, as soon as Staley was fired and they kind of simplified Derwin's role to basically like, all right, you're just going to play safety. He, take PFF for what it's worth, but he had, 3 of his best games in the season, kind of all right in a row where he sort of looked like normal Derwin again. And I think that examples just like that are are a way to get this defense back on track, even though they don't know exactly who the personnel is going to be next year, obviously, with some pretty big decisions. I'll throw the restructures question at you because there's a chance that obviously the guys they restructured last year, and Keenan, Bosa, Mike, and Khalil aren't back next year, through either cuts or trades. If you're GM and you're thinking forward or just 2024, whatever direction you want to take the question, what would you do?
I think cuts are on the table. If I'm them, I thought Joey Bosa was really disappointing this year. Mac was not so disappointing, but he's getting up there in age. And when you look at the circumstances for this huge sack season, I don't know if they'll happen again. Keenan Allen, it would be the toughest to part with him because of the security blanket he's been and how productive he's been over the past, basically his entire career. But if you had the 5th overall pick and a guy like Odunze is coming in, it could be a decent move to save some money at the wide receiver position. I think all of those cuts are on the table. You've got Tuli Pelotu behind the edges. I think all three of them could be on the chopping block, but you probably keep Keenan around just because there are so few other for sure good players on the offense, and Justin Herbert has to come back and throw to somebody. So for another season, maybe bring him back. But both of the edges, I could definitely see you moving on from and trying to replace with cheaper options.
Yeah, I would see maybe if there's some way they could swing a trade for Khalil Mack or something and maybe take on some of his salary this year because he's on an expiring contract. And then maybe you could get I don't even know what the trade compensation would be, maybe one mid-round pick and one late-round pick, something like that. Other than that, Keenan's probably the other trade asset you're looking at in that capacity. But again, you're asking teams to take on big cap hits, and that could be sort of difficult to do. But yeah, I don't know. And then the Quentin Johnson thing in this is how does that kind of affect your decision making on Keenan and Mike? Because now that you don't know what you have there, but you also now have this top 5 pick where maybe you walk into a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze, right? But it also then limits if you want to take a Brock Bowers or not, right? So I do kind of think it's interesting the position they're in, but Mike has kind of, unfortunately been hurt the last couple of years, even though when he does play, he's great. It's a tough position to be in, that the fact that they went all in with this group and then, are now kind of experiencing the ramifications of it. But
yeah, it's going to have to be a coaching shift that is the major change next year more than a roster improvement. If Vrabel or Harbaugh is the guy, I didn't really talk much about Vrabel, but I love that they are that physical head coach, especially Harbaugh. I feel like everywhere he's been, it's gotten really physical there. Like the old San Francisco games, that was a real defense with Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis. And then Michigan, that's a real physical defense when you go in and play them. And the Ravens, who kind of brought that Michigan culture to their defense with Mike Macdonald, that's the most physical group in the league this year. So that's where the big improvement has to come, is a mindset change that comes from the coach. Because they've handicapped themselves in a big way with their moves these past couple of years. It's going to probably look worse on paper, maybe even instead of better going into next year compared to where it's been in the past.
Yeah, Vrabel's an interesting one because if you kind of combine his scrappy turnover forcing defense with an actual a Justin Herbert instead of a Ryan Tannehill, engineering that offense, that is pretty appealing depending on who his offensive coordinator choice would be. But yeah, Vrabel's an interesting one. I know he just interviewed for the job yesterday. But yeah, final prediction, I guess, who do the Chargers end up going with? And I guess, I think you're going to say Jim Harbaugh, but what are kind of, some of your expectations maybe you didn't mention for Harbaugh so far?
Yeah, my expectation is that he gets the job. My prediction is it's a good hire. My prediction is he it might be kind of short-lived. I wonder how long Harbaugh can stay at any one place just because he doesn't seem
Yeah.
to do super well with like authority. And I wonder, if he was the GM and had all this power, like how good would he be in that role? Would it be planned out for, thinking for years or decades, like in
Mhm.
advance? I don't know if it would be. It could turn bad eventually with Jim Harbaugh, and it has before in the past. But for a couple years, I think he gives you a really great window, and that's what he's shown. It's like when he gets his hands on something, it starts working in overdrive, and then maybe it kind of breaks
Right.
or like gets in trouble. And that's kind of what I'm expecting with the Chargers. I think they'll probably hand him the keys. A lot of wheels will start to turn. A lot of things will start happening. I think they're going to get kind of good in a hurry, and then it'll just be, you know, what's Harbaugh up to? Like, is he getting in trouble with the league? Is he arguing with the Spanos family? Does Justin Herbert not like him or something? Like, I just would be like waiting for that story to drop while the Chargers win games. Like, that's honestly my expectation because that's what it's
Yeah.
been.
Yeah, that is what it's been, or yeah, how long can he stay or wants to stay in one place, right? I
Yeah,
I do think the age component of this is interesting because he's only 60, but
yeah,
he is still one of the older coaching candidates. Kind of in the same vein of like Bill Belichick of like how long does he want to do this for, right?
hmm
And so that's kind of the thing the Falcons are in with that because it's like, is he going to be here for 3, 4 years? Is he going to be here for longer than that? And I kind of think the same logic could apply to Harbaugh. Not that he's like old, but I do think that's relevant at least, I guess.
it's definitely relevant. I mean, if you hit on Ben Johnson, he could be your coach
Right.
forever. Like, he could be your coach through someone's whole life. Like, but the odds that happens are so low.
Right.
And Harbaugh is a good 12 years younger than Belichick or something like
That's true.
that. Like, Belichick's in his 70s, Harbaugh is exactly 60. So it's still going to be a good window. I mean, a good portion of Justin Herbert's career there is precedent of, coaches going into their 70s like Belichick and Carroll. So I don't think that it's the biggest deal in the world. I would be more concerned about a guy like Belichick. He's now the oldest in the league, like by far, I'd imagine, since Pete Carroll's in an advisor role.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think it's quite the same.
I think
It's
he'll I think
quite
he'll
as
become
severe.
I think he'll become the oldest coach to coach at some point this season. I think it was I think Romeo Crennel has the record
Really?
at like 73 or something like that. I was googling that the other day. So I think if Belichick coaches another year, he'll he'll have him beat.
I'm a little
Um,
surprised by that. Honestly, I thought that maybe there'd be like some 80-year-old out there, like
no.
like a Bud Grant who just hung
Yeah.
on to the very, very, very end.
Yeah, Buddy Ryan didn't stay around long enough. One of those guys, but it was nice having you on, Theo. Let the people know what you have going on over at Stay Hot and other places.
Yeah, you can find me at Theo Ash NFL on Twitter and Theo Ash NFL on TikTok. Then, of course, my collaborative effort with Matt and Blade in the Stay Hot podcast for any Chargers fans who want someone who will fight the Justin Herbert fight.
Yeah, not his
you can
fault.
you can not his fault. You can watch my my stuff. I'll probably be on that side.
All right, see you guys later. Bolt up.